Francisco Alvarez has expressed interest in signing a pre-arb extension with the New York Mets. How much would it cost to get him signed? I'll break it all down on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. Also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. It's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Francisco Alvarez turned 22 years old last month, and he's coming off a really solid rookie season. He hit 25 home runs. He drove in 63 runs. And while the overall offensive numbers ended up grading out slightly below average, it was still a really good offensive season, particularly from a catcher, which are always sort of grading on a curve. And Alvarez showed streaks where he could actually carry a lineup. Now, the problem was he also had streaks where he was the worst hitter in the lineup. He was very up and down, and that's why the numbers altogether collectively weren't fantastic. But he showed you so many glimmers of what he could become, and more than anything, he impressed behind the plate defensively. I mean, I did an entire show, I have multiple shows this offseason about Alvarez's rookie year, how he's their next homegrown star. If they have a homegrown superstar right now, it's Alvarez. He's the guy that can, grab that type of a title in the not too distant future. And what he did with the glove is what really impressed, because we had no idea what he was going to be defensively. It's so hard to really get any sense of what a player is going to be when they make their debut when it comes to the defensive side of the ball. There's stats that don't really tell you too much in the minor leagues, particularly for a catcher. All you can go off of is if you're lucky enough to watch him play a little bit, and then the scouting reports that you see or read about. And, they weren't really overwhelmingly positive on his defense. And, part of it I really believe for Alvarez was the fact that his bat really forced him, quickly through the minors and, pushed his way promotion by promotion. And his glove always had to catch up. And I've mentioned this before on the show, but the ironic thing about Alvarez last year is it was his glove that got him on the team, because when Omar Narvaez went down, Alvarez was the only other catcher on the 40-man roster. And so the Mets called him up, and he just never gave up that job. And the first thing he did was earn Buck Showalter's trust behind the plate, and then he was able to get a steady diet of playing time, and then he started to flash that power, and the rest is history. This guy should be the Mets starting catcher for the next 5 years. There's no doubt about it, but that's the issue here. That's the hang up. It's 5 years. It's a lot of team control, but this guy has expressed some interest in discussing a contract extension. We are seeing in the game more than ever, pre-arb extensions are how teams are doing business. And it's not just small market teams. It's everybody, because you are taking a system that, quite honestly, is unfair to players who are at their peak value at a time where they're not getting paid. And just to get to free agency is such a slog that guys are willing to take, far less market value up front on these contracts just to make sure they get that bag, to make sure that they're going to have, $50+ million to their name, and their professional baseball career is a success, regardless of the fact that if they played it all out, they might be able to start to make, once they hit arbitration, $15 million, depending on the player. If they can get the all-star recognition, they can win some, different awards along the way. You can, start that pre-arb number, close to 8 figures eventually, and you start moving down the line with it. But that's the absolute top that can get to the point where by the end of arbitration, they're like Pete Alonso making north of $20 million. For most guys, you don't even get that. So again, signing a pre-arb extension is a way to make sure you secure your money. And Alvarez is interested, and the Mets should really consider this because this is a chance to get Francisco Alvarez on a contract that locks him into a reasonable number where you can buy out his control. You can buy Francisco Alvarez's age 20 seasons, everything up to age 30. If you sign him to an 8-year deal, that would take him all the way up to turning 30 years old in November of, what would that be? 2031, I believe. And then he could, hit the open market at that stage. But the first contract we're going to look at as we start to try to get a sense here of what Alvarez could make right now is Keibert Ruiz of the Washington Nationals, who signed an 8-year, $50 million contract with the Nationals prior to last season. Now, Ruiz was 24 years old at the time, coming off his first full year with Washington, where he had a 673 OPS and 112 games played, but graded out well defensively. I signed him to the deal. He goes out, has a much better offensive season, hits 18 home runs, still grades out solid defensively, and it's already looking like a steal of a contract. In that deal, he got a $3 million signing bonus. He made $1 million last year. He'll make $6 million this year, then $5 million a year for what would have been his 3 arbitration years, before he'll make $7 million in year 6, and then $9 million apiece in year 7 and 8, his 2 free agent years. Then there's 2 club options on the deal, one for $12 million, then another for $14 million. There's no buyout, so they can just refuse to pick up those options. They don't have to pay him any penalty on that, and they can get out of that deal at 8 years, $50 million, or they could pick up those 2 options, and it's a 10-year, $76 million deal. Ruiz won't hit free agency until he's 32 years old at the youngest or 34 years old at the oldest. It's a great deal for the Nationals. You have locked up your starting catcher at an affordable number for a long time. The Mets can now look to do something similar with Francisco Alvarez. The price tag might be a little bit more than Ruiz because Alvarez is a bigger impact player. He's also a far bigger star, which means a little bit of something. But what we're going to discuss in the next segment is we're going to look at other position players outside of the catcher position and what they've signed and how you can really see sort of a cap on what he could make if he signs a deal this offseason, and why this is absolutely the time to negotiate and get something done. I'm going to break down exactly what I believe Alvarez would sign for right now in the next segment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Score this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. It's $150 if your team wins. If you think about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. You got the NFL season winding down, so the playoffs are going to be upon us sooner than you think. You also have the NBA season in mid-swing. So many stars that you can bet on if you're looking at the NBA games, and so many different betting options you have at FanDuel. The app is so easy to use. You can bet on the spread, player props. So if it's the NBA, points, rebounds, assists, 3-pointers made. If it's the NFL, you can bet on touchdown scored, rushing yards, catches, whatever it is. And again, there's the over-unders on player props and on the game score and so much more. And you still have that $5 money line bet. If you win that, $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. If you don't want to miss out on any of the latest Mets news this offseason, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime something breaks in the New York Mets. You can also ask me questions. I try to answer every single question I get on subtext, so I appreciate all of you who subscribe. If you want to join today, you can find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so I looked at some of the pre-arb extensions of the last couple of years to get a sense at what the ceiling on a Francisco Alvarez contract would be. You see, Corbin Carroll got a 8-year, $111 million deal before last season. That deal maxes out at 9 years and $154 million. He's got MVP escalators on there for where he finishes in the voting. which I think he might have even hit one this past year for finishing in the top 5. He has to hit all those things, get his club option picked up to get to the $154 million. It's the one contract that's in that neighborhood of Julio Rodriguez, who got $200+ million in his pre-arb deal with the Mariners. These guys are one-of-one type players. Bobby Witt Jr. might be the next one to sign a contract like this. Guys that, have that MVP potential. Alvarez, as good as we think he can be, he's not getting that level of a contract right now. The two deals that really I think are worth studying here is Michael Harris's contract and Brian Hayes. They both got 8-year deals around $70 million. For Harris, it was $72 million with a $15 million club option in his first free agent year beyond that, and then $20 million for a second option. And then Brian Hayes, 8 years, $70 million, $12 million club option. So I think that's probably the range that we're looking at here. To again look at the absolute ceiling, Andres Gimenez, he got an 8-year deal, $106.5 million, coming off of his first year with the Guardians. Actually, that was his second year with the Guardians. And it was an all-star season. He was great. He finished 6th in the MVP vote in 2022, and he won a Gold Glove. This past year, he won a Platinum Glove. He was coming off a far better season than what Alvarez just put up. So, again, all of this is to say, if Francisco Alvarez were to sign a pre-arb extension with the New York Mets, he's not crossing $100 million. And it's more likely that he's going to get better than the $50 million that Ruiz got, but not, quite up to that 9-figure level. So I believe that an 8-year contract for Francisco Alvarez from the New York Mets that he would sign tomorrow ends up coming in at $75 million. That's an AAV of $9.375 million. Really affordable number. Now, how I came up with the $75 million is because we're going to put a couple club options in this deal that'll have a $5 million buyout. Again, if we refer to Michael Harris's contract, 8 years, $72 million, but he's only getting paid $67 million over that 8-year deal. That last $5 million comes in as the buyout on his options. He's guaranteed to get at least $5 million if the Braves decide they don't want to exercise those club options. So that's how he goes from 67 to 72. Same thing could happen here with Francisco Alvarez. He's essentially getting an 8-year, $70 million deal, which will buy out his 2 years of pre-arb, his 3 arbitration years, and his first 3 free agent years. And then he could have 2 club options for maybe it's $15 million and $20 million, just like Harris, with that $5 million buyout. And so if he ends up getting those 2 options picked up, Francisco Alvarez would have essentially signed a 10-year, $105 million deal. For the New York Mets, that can be incredible value because I can see a world where Francisco Alvarez is a 30 home run hitter while giving you above average defense behind the plate. And I think he can hit for a higher average than he did this past year and get on base at a better clip as well and be a lot less streaky. It might take some time to put it all together, but the ceiling of what this guy is the best catcher in baseball. Now, is he ever going to be better than Adley Rutschman and Will Smith and JT Realmuto? Who knows? We really are still so early in his career that there's no guarantee of if he's going to hit his ceiling. But top 5 catcher in baseball, I'm almost getting close to saying that is a realistic outcome at some point because there's just not a lot of guys at the catcher position that can give you the level of power as Francisco Alvarez. And if he can back up his rookie season and continue to defend at that level, be one of the better pitch framers in baseball, even improve a little bit in controlling the running game. He has a good pop time, his arm's strong. He's just got to get a little bit better there at really, throwing down those runners, which is, tougher and tougher now with the new base stealing rules. But he's got so much promise. And if you can lock him in where, again, it's basically an 8-year, $70 million deal with 2 options that are relatively affordable to buy 2 more free agent years, and it all ends up costing you just over $100 million for 10 years of control of this guy, that is an absolute steal. And that's the type of contract the Mets have to start signing. When they develop a player that is worthy of, being a starter for a long time, you need to make sure that you have that player identified early and get them to sign on the dotted line, because that's how the game's operating. And the thing that I think we're going to see more and more, this free agent class is one example of it. You're going to get these free agent years where there's just not going to be as many star players that are available. It's almost like the NBA, right? All of a sudden, guys have gotten to a point where they take the extension from their team, knowing that they can always ask out and get traded. And so they've circumvented free agency. And now free agency isn't the same thing at all like it used to be in the NBA. I think the same thing is going to happen to a certain extent in Major League Baseball, where these guys are going to sign their pre-arb extensions, the best possible players. They're going to sign those deals early. Like you're going to see Jackson Holiday sign a contract with the Orioles to just lock in his money before he debuts. That could happen. Jackson Chourio just did it with the Brewers. And these players are going to be getting paid earlier in their careers than they have before, but they're not going to be maxing out their value the same way that a Juan Soto will next year. I think it's just the way the game is going, and the Mets have to get behind that trend. That's why Alvarez should be extended this offseason. Honestly, I'll put my money where my mouth is right here and say this. The New York Mets, if I had to pick which one of the two players they extended this offseason, Pete Alonso or Francisco Alvarez, I'd say Alvarez. And the reason I say that is they have the leverage to get a really good contract. They've lost all their leverage on Pete Alonso. At this point, they'd just be paying market value. I'd still be happy if they did it, but they're not incentivized to get a deal done. With Alvarez, they are. And what I want to do in the final segment to close out the show is look at the farm system and try to identify the next player who will be worthy of that type of a pre-arb extension. So we're going to look at that next. Before we do, though, another word from our sponsors. Locked On has launched the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube covering all the latest in the world of sports with our local experts on every team and our league-wide experts on each league. Make sure you find Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, I really appreciate all of you who hit that subscribe button over the last couple of days. We have achieved our goal of 7,500 subs by the end of the new year. Now I'm challenging you with not much time left to see if we can actually make a push to 8,000 subs. So I appreciate all of you who help us work towards that goal and hit that subscribe button. All right, let's look at the Mets farm system now and try to identify the next player who could get a pre-arb extension from the Mets. Well, actually, before we get to the farm, I just want to get out of the way. Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos, Ronnie Mauricio, none of them have shown enough that you could feel confident giving them a pre-arb extension. Now, there's every chance that one of those three, or really one of those two right now because of Mauricio being hurt, but there's a shot that Beatty or Vientos will have a breakout season, and if they do, hey, maybe they are the next to get a pre-arb extension. You just can't count on it right now. So you look over to the farm system. There's the top three prospect in this system right now that all could be worthy of a pre-arb extension at some point in the next calendar year, you'd say, or maybe a little beyond that, before opening day in 2025. Guys that might debut this upcoming season, might show enough where you say, you know what, let's get a deal done. And again, those three prospects, top three in the system, are Jet Williams, Drew Gilbert, and Luis Angel Acuna. Now, which of these guys is the best suited to sign a contract extension such as that? It's early, right? We still have to see how these guys look this upcoming season. Can they build off of strong years? Can they make their debuts? But if there's one that I look at right now, and I believe that the player will have a high enough floor that the Mets could consider a pre-arb extension. Again, not right now, but let's say after the 2024 season. If I had to put my money on any of them, I think it would be Jet Williams, because I believe he should be considered the top prospect in this farm system based on what he did last year and what he did at the age where he was 19 years old and found his way to Double-A and looked comfortable in a short, time in Double-A. He hit a home run at a playoff game in Double-A. He has the athleticism. He could be a shortstop, but with Lindor, He might end up moving out to center field, which obviously is a position that brings a lot of value. He could be your starting second baseman. He's going to draw his walks. He's going to get on base at a really high clip. And that just raises the floor more for a guy with his speed who can steal bases. Now, Luis Angel Acuna is a somewhat similar player profile right now. Guys that are predicated on their athleticism, guys that are shortstops who are probably going to move over to second base with the New York Mets. And they're the two that are really angling for that, future, second baseman that's going to start next to Lindor for potentially, the rest of that contract. These guys are similar, but Acuna doesn't quite have the plate discipline that Jet Williams has showed up to this point. And so if Williams can continue to draw these walks and get on base, it's going to allow him to utilize his speed more frequently. Acuna has to hit for a high average to get on base so that he can steal those bags and really show that value. When it comes to power, I don't know which one is going to end up tapping into more pop. It really is a toss-up at this stage. But I just believe in who Jet Williams could become. I believe in his floor being very high. And I think at this point, you can already sort of project that he's going to be a starting big leaguer. Now, the same could be said for Acuna, but I could see the floor dropping out on Acuna a little more than I can see it with Jet. So, again, if I had to pick one of the two right now, who I would think next year is in that conversation to get the pre-arb extension, it's probably Jet Williams. But I also want to acknowledge that it could be Acuna, and it really could be Drew Gilbert as well. I mean, Drew Gilbert had such a great close to the season in Binghamton after he got traded for Justin Verlander. And, he is the best outfield prospect in this system right now. Now, if Jet Williams is officially converted to more of an outfielder, there's a conversation to be had. But Drew Gilbert is an elite defensive outfielder, so that raises his floor. He is highly regarded for the way he plays the game, the energy that he takes to the field each night. And he already started to tap into that power a little bit. Not to say that he's going to be some 30 home run guy, but I think sort of best outcome for Drew Gilbert is you end up with another version of a Brandon Nimmo, but with a stronger arm and a guy that can maybe reach that ceiling quicker than Nimmo did. Because for Nimmo, it took a lot of time to eventually get to the player that he has become, who's a guy that can be an all-star, though he still hasn't been, and a guy that this past year was able to really tap into the power and show that, hey, maybe there is 30 home runs in the tank at some point. More likely it's 20 to 25, but 20 to 25 for Brandon Nimmo is really nice, especially when he gets on base at the clip that he does. Drew Gilbert, if he can get to that and get to that quicker, that's going to be a really valuable player and one that would be deserving of a pre-arb extension. But I think when you sort of forecast how the Mets get to the point where they can be a sustainable winner, it's those guys panning out, identifying them at an age where they can get those guys signed. And then that's just going to lower how much, your team's going to cost in 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029, because those guys will still be on these pre-arb deals that have them capped out at a certain number that's way more affordable than if they ended up getting to free agency and then you have to pay them that big money deal. Sometimes it doesn't work out, though. I mean, Brandon Nimmo, perfect example. It had to play out the way it did because he had so many injuries that you wouldn't have been comfortable giving him a pre-arb extension. But then he figured it out in his contract year, got paid, and looked great in the first year of that deal. So there's no exact right way to keep your homegrown talent, but the way the game is trending, it's certainly pre-arb extensions. Francisco Alvarez showed enough that he is deserving of getting one this offseason, and I'll look forward to seeing which of these next wave of young guys can establish themselves in this upcoming year, and maybe we can have the same conversation a year from now. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. For tomorrow's show, I want to break down or stay a little bit in the farm system, which of the Mets' top pitching prospects could contribute in a big way this upcoming season. So if I can find the data I'm looking for on these guys, that'll be the show tomorrow. Of course, that's barring any breaking news. If you don't want to miss out on any of the latest Locked On Mets content, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. You can find a link in the episode's description. Follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Follow on X at Finkelstein Ryan to follow me. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. And now that you are done with today's show, if you're watching on YouTube, check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel covering everything in the world of sports. Again, that is Locked On Sports Today.